The short answer is the inverse. When wouldn't we use process? Never. I mean, the only way any organisation gets work done is through its cross-functional business process.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with industry experts, key influencers, people that work in the area of business process management. And obviously, that's a very broad and very diverse topic. And the word process means different things to different people. And obviously, for the people that are tuning in or will be listening to this, you're probably coming from a background with something to do in process or some connection to process. And you'll be in an organization that at a different maturity levels, process maturity levels. And, we all want to understand process better so that it can deliver real tangible value to the organizations that we're part of. In today's episode, as I was saying before, we're into our hundreds of episodes, 110 or something like that, which is absolutely fantastic in this series. And it's normally a fantastic discussion, one-on-one conversation diving into this topic of process with my guest. But today we wanted to put on a special episode for you where we opened it up to an audience, a live audience, and allowed you to throw your questions at my guest today, and that guest being Roger Tregear. Roger, thanks for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
And so what I wanted to do, because it's a little bit of a different episode, I just wanted to point your attention to, or direct your attention to, there's a Q&A box. And we've already got one question coming through, which is fantastic. So you've got a Q&A panel or section down the bottom, a Q&A button. Open up the Q&A box, start putting your questions in there. Leading up to this event, I've had, a good 50 or so questions get sent through to me to ask Roger, a lot of them by people that couldn't make it today. But if you've got a burning question on your mind at the moment, please enter them into the chat, because we want to get around to it today. Now, most of you will be familiar with Roger's work. But yeah, I'm keen to dive into it. That sounds good, Roger, to you?
Yep, sure. We're good to go. Yep.
Cool. Sounds good. So what we'll do, Kirk's jumped in pretty quick. So we'll jump into that question first. He says, hello, Kirk, here from the US. Thanks for joining us, Kirk. It's probably towards the end of your day, I'd imagine. I've spoken with Roger before. A high-level question. Value streams are popular as analysis tools, but what are the common parent process categories that live above the value stream areas?
Thanks, Kirk. Good to hear from you again. I think this question so nicely sums up all the problems we have in the process space, doesn't it? Because we trip over definitions all of the time. So let me tell you how I would start to build a process hierarchy, or process architecture, as I would call it, another term that might be contestable. But I would start, I'll come back to your question, I'm not trying to avoid it, but just to give you my perspective. I would start with strategy, vision, mission, objectives, whatever the strategic documents are, and say, what are the promises we make? That's what strategy is about, isn't it? What are the promises we make and to whom? Our value proposition or propositions, if you like. And from that, I would derive the highest level core processes, I would call them, and core as opposed to management and support. And then from there, I'd call those level one processes, and I'd decompose down as many levels as you might need to. So that's the kind of structure that I use. And you'll notice in there, I didn't say value stream or parent process. But I like to start with, and they would fit in there somewhere, I'm sure. These are all issues of definition. But I like to start with the strategy. It's about how we execute strategy. That's what processes are about. That's why it's important. And if you can start from that and you can get you're say it's a hospital, and you'd end up with at least one of the highest level core processes might say something like care for patients. And if it's a teaching hospital, it's about producing healthcare professionals or something like that. Or if it's a university, it's produce graduates. It's a high level interpretation of the strategy specifically, and then work your way down. Now, that might be a value stream, or it might. If a parent process is just the highest level process, then that's what I'm calling level one, I guess. Daniel, you had a comment, I think.
Just on that, something I've seen that through the organisations that we work with, there is often a disconnect between that strategic level, that strategic layer, and the work that's getting done from both ends. It's from the executive or from that senior leadership, that high level view. It's like, how do we actually meet our strategic objectives? How do we actually get this stuff done? And then also from those working on the business processes, understanding the importance of having that work tied to the strategic objectives. Is the work that's actually getting done helping us head in the right direction, or are we just doing work for work's sake? And I think we saw a lot of that just stuff getting done exposed, especially in the COVID, the last 2 years, because it really challenged organisations to look at what they were getting done. Is this actually valuable? Is it beneficial? And there are many organisations that scrapped large programs or pieces of work because they recognised that actually this wasn't delivering value. It wasn't helping us move in the direction we want to head in. And organisations need to critique carefully the work that they were doing. One thing I will say is, for those that do have questions, happy to unmute you as well. If you've got a question that you wanted to ask Roger or give further clarification on, maybe stick up your hand, and I'm happy to unmute you and you can have a bit of a chat with Roger as well. But we'll move on. Next question, another good question from Marcus Udo Kang. Is to process or not to process? That is the question. When do we use process and why?
So the short answer is the inverse. When wouldn't we use process? Never. I mean, the only way any organisation gets work done is through its cross-functional business process. We might manage up and down the org chart, but the work gets done across the org chart. And not just in the boxes on the org chart, but the collaboration between the boxes. And that's not a choice. It's a kind of law of nature. You can choose whether to manage that cross-functional operation or not, but nevertheless, even if you say, I don't believe in processes, the processes keep working. You can choose to manage them or not, or you can choose to just, hope they all come together, which doesn't seem like a great execution strategy. So I think it's always important, and it's always going to work best if you can start from the top down. It doesn't take long to put together the higher level of a process architecture. And then every process you're working on, locate it somewhere in the architecture at some level. And it doesn't mean you've got to identify every process in the architecture. You'll come down maybe 3 levels to start with, and then the bottom of the architecture might be pretty ragged. You'll get down to level 4 and 5 in some places, and others you'll never go past 3. You're only going to do it when you need to. So I think you should be doing it all the time.
No, that's great. Marcus, I just was going to bring you on, allow you to add anything or clarify anything for your question if you're there. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Sorry, thank you. I'm actually walking home from work, so I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
All right, I think he answered it quite well and quite poignantly. It's good to know that.
Yeah. I think it's fundamental, isn't it, that what we really need, the message we need to get across is that this is happening all the time. It's not something we choose to do. It's not a project. It's a way of management life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's good. Okay, just don't mind me while I figure out all of these extra features on Zoom. Okay, so next we've got Ivy with a question. Hi, Roger. It's Ivy from Melbourne. I'd love to learn from your experience on how to realise BPM benefits in a relatively short time frame to attract LT attention.
Yeah. So LT. What was this? Is this? What's the acronym?
LT. Ivy. I'm just going to bring you on, and hopefully
executive attention.
Oh, yes, it's me. Sorry, Roger. I've been so used to use those acronyms. That's a leadership team.
A leadership team, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, now that you tell me, it's obvious. Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, certainly. So the aspiration is absolutely correct, isn't it? We've got to deliver benefits, and don't be saying, yeah, in 12 months' time we'll deliver it, or maybe in 2 years. Early signs are encouraging. That's not going to last. So, I always tell people that the attention span is, it's not going to go much past 3 months. If you can't be delivering some actual benefit, then you might be in trouble. So. And I think it sets the bar pretty high. I talk about proven valued business benefits for the business, not just for the IT or process team, valued by the business, not just the process people, and proven with objective data about which there's no dispute. And that sets the bar pretty high. But if we're not doing that, what are we doing? None of our organizations have got a business problem called we don't have enough process models. That's not a business problem. No doubt a solution to some problems, or a partial solution, but it's, we have to be able to do it. So, when you start out, you're looking at a particular process. Firstly, I think it's important to understand why you're even looking at it. How did this, out of the thousands of processes you've got, why are you looking at this one? And what would good look like? If we're going to improve this, what would happen? What would be better about it? So what are the process KPIs and targets? And then what's the current level of performance? Because if we don't know, don't tell me it takes too long. You can't deal with that. I mean, if it takes 3 hours, I could do it in 2 hours, 55 minutes. That's shorter, but it's probably not what they meant. So, what does good look like? And then what's happening now? Okay, now we've got a gap. And if it's got to go from 3 hours to 2 hours, maybe that's easy. If it's got to go from 3 hours to 3 minutes, that's a different thing. It might still be necessary, but it's a different problem to solve. So I think we need to understand what we mean by improvement. And then we've got to get good buy-in to the fact that improvement is required. So many process improvement projects make a lot more recommendations than they make changes. And it's because we had this process and we had to run this PIP through whatever method we're using. And so we came up, we had to cover, let's have 5 changes. So we come up with a list of 5, great PowerPoint presentation, and then nothing happened because, nobody cared. There's no real business case. I mean, it's a kind of, we might do it if we want to, but there's no compelling reason. So the whole thing was a waste of time. So I think we've got to have good buy-in. It's got to be a real business problem, and then we've got to have a real solution, and we've got to get on and do it, and then tell people that it's worked, or learn if it hasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one question that has come up in the Process Pioneers series a number of times is what keeps them awake at night, and it's a good visual to have because I would say there was a moment last week, maybe a week or two ago, where something kept me awake at night. I was up to midnight, and then that same thing woke me up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. because it was, it was putting pressure on, and it was potentially stressful for me. That's the pain point that in that moment I needed to solve. And so by asking that question, well, what is it for, whichever senior leader or executive you're trying to get on board, what do they really care about? Why are they waking up at 4 a.m. And starting work early because they've got this burning platform or this huge problem that they're trying to solve, and trying to understand, put yourself in their shoes and understand what are they thinking, and how can what I'm trying to achieve support that and help them solve provide a solution to their problem as well. Great. Okay. Next, we've got Jeffrey Sage. I would like to define the level above what Kirk is asking for as operational models that fit between the strategy and business process management. This would lead a company with how to realize a strategy, answering the questions of who does what for whom, how, and why. How would you document this?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Good to hear from you. So, I'm the process guy, so I will grudgingly admit that process isn't everything, but gee, it's pretty close. Because it is the way we execute strategy, but the process, and so you define the process, but all sorts of other architectures and views and perspectives and stuff also need to come into account in the kind of general business model, operational model. So you need all of those pieces. So, and my work is about the process piece, but obviously you need all the other bits. I would just like to see process at the center of all of that, though. Whatever other artifacts you might think useful in the sort of enterprise architecture, business model, business canvas kind of world, for me, literally and figuratively, I'd have process right there in the middle of it because it's the point. It's what it's there for. And I think it's a very instructive thing when you say, okay, here's the strategy, vision, mission. We've got the posters. We've got a handful of strategic objectives or whatever. We've got purpose statements. We've got all that good stuff. Now, how do we execute that? Let's translate that into a set of processes. I find that a cathartic thing for many organizations to do because in the process, in the vision or somewhere in the strategy, it says, something about being a good corporate citizen. Okay, tick, that's a bullet point for sure. Who'd vote against that? So what are we going to do? What is the process? I don't know, support community welfare or community well-being. Let's say that's a process. Support community well-being. What is that? What are the sub-processes of that? Well, what do you mean? Well, when the rubber hits the road, what are we going to do? How do we be a good corporate citizen? Avoid going to jail. Is that it? That sets the bar pretty low. It's probably a good thing, but so I think a lot of those things, again, there's a terminology issue, but a lot of those things come into place when you start having that conversation about how do we operationalize this strategy in terms of a coherent set of processes, which may not have answered your question, Jeff, but
I've just unmuted you, Jeffrey, if you wanted to add to that question.
Yeah, the question I had was that the most of the business process work that you see is done in BPM and 2.0 standards and so on, which then can be translated into low-code or no-code solutions. And what I'm looking at is how the outcomes of what people do flow across a company, and that's what I refer to as an operational model.
Okay. Yep.
It's above that BPM and 2.0 type of diagrams, and there's a high number of interactions that happen with people across an organization at that level. And I just wondered if there was a mechanism in which you use or recommend to document that at that level.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, well, it's almost not modeling in the traditional understanding of process modeling at that point, isn't it? It's just really saying what's going on. So go back to the hospital. We've got process care for patients, and what are the process KPIs for that? I mean, it's a large part of what the hospital does, if not all of it. Or if it's a teaching hospital, it's got some other things. But if it's a traditional hospital, it's their only high-level core process, I guess. The sort of modeling you're going to do is, it's very high-level kind of stuff, isn't it? And just don't listen for a minute, Daniel. But sometimes I think process modeling is the least important thing to do in process management. You can take your fingers out of your ears again, Daniel. We often have to do modeling, of course, and if you're going to do it, you've got to have a good tool. And a good tool, I don't know, I'm not the tech guy, but it's not a drawing package. It's some repository-based tool that's lots of objects to play with.
The operating model can be supported by multiple processes, multiple business processes.
Sure.
When you're talking about an operating model, you're talking about, customer care or patient care or, client acquisition or something like that. There may be several processes that support that operational model. So that's what I'm saying is that operational model level is where you really get down to, what am I really doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And if you're doing it in that hierarchical process view, then you've got a nice coherent view of it too. So, there is a life cycle for a patient at a hospital.
Exactly.
And most of that, you go way down, maybe 2 or 3 levels in there, and you're still talking cross-functional.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The hospital doesn't work without the accountants or without the people who keep the lights on. It's not just about doctors and nurses and whatever. It's almost everything we do until we get quite a way down in the hierarchy is still cross-functional in some sense.
Oh yeah, if you don't have cross-functional, then it's not really a good process then.
No, that's right. No, we're just all doing our bit with our blinkers on and hoping it all comes together on the day. And as they say, hope is not a strategy.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Jeffrey. That's great. We've got another question here from Lourdes Gonzalez. Lourdes, good to have you on in the session. She says, "Hi, Roger. As you may have experienced, corporations tend to move faster than government agencies from the perspective of process. What recommendation do you have to bring a government through the journey towards process excellence?" And Lourdes, I'm just going to unmute you as well if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I think I've got it, Lourdes. Hi, Lourdes.
Hi, Roger.
So, I'm starting to think these days, just kind of my N=1 experience, but I'm starting to think that government might be more on top of this caper than the private sector. It's certainly my experience over the last little while. I'm talking to government agencies who really get it. They're not just doing modelling and improvement projects, but they're actually trying to do continuous management. So, but there's a big difference, of course. And I was talking to someone just recently, way back, I think it was 2007. I wrote a paper for a conference with one of my clients at the time, Terry Jenkins, and we were comparing what we called government process management and business process management, and just looking for some kind of fundamental differences. And I still have that paper. I dug it out the other day. It's on my website, or if someone wants it, I'm happy to send it. But we were trying to see what's the difference. And obviously there's a difference. If your mission statement, your vision says we're going to protect Australia and its assets, classic Department of Defence type thing, that's a bit different to being, we'll be the low-cost provider of something. There's a very real difference there. The exchange that happens between the organisation and the customer is quite different. Has a different quantitative and qualitative feel to it. So I think there are lots of differences like that. But, the whole idea of joined up government and government being more efficient and being more responsive. I was talking to someone just recently in the transport business, and they're not talking about how you catch the bus or the ferry or the train or the tram. They have a very real focus on connected journeys. And that's not a long way from cross-functional processes, is it? So I don't know, maybe government might have some catching up to do because it hasn't had that direct profit, customer satisfaction, market capitalisation pressure. But I think it is catching up. And I think the elegance of government process management might get to be pretty impressive.
And I know that it's different in different parts of the world. I know that there are some governments or some countries where it's mandated that they need to, or governments that they mandated they need to have processes, an understanding of their processes. It needs to be documented and governed and managed well. And obviously, if there's a mandate in line with that, then obviously they're going to be investing resources, time, money into that area of process management. Whereas in other countries in the world, if it's not mandated, then it is something that may slip by the wayside. But thanks for that, Lourdes. That was great. We've got another question coming up from, we'll go Peter McFarlane. So Peter asks, can customer journey mapping, service design and process management coexist, and how do you see the focus of the disciplines being differentiated?
Yep. Okay. G'day, Pete. How you doing? So, obviously they must coexist because whether you're doing service design or customer journey mapping processes are still delivering. So we have to find a way for them to work together. Again, partly a matter of definitions, of course, but what is the service and what do we mean by that? If put aside the idea that a service is a piece of software, but if it's a service in the general sense of the thing, it's probably what we mean by what is our process delivering, and the customer's journey along our processes and theirs, and perhaps intermediaries and all sorts of other things. So I think neither service design or journey mapping are a replacement for process modelling and management, but they're a nice addition to it. It's all very well for us to know lots about our processes, but we might want to know what the customer's experiencing, what they're feeling, etc., as they go through our process. Is it filling them with joy, or are they thinking, I wish I wasn't here? That would be good to know.
Any thoughts there, Peter?
Yeah, I've had a bit of. By the way, great to see you both again. Been too long. I had some recent experience with this where we've had customer journeys being done, and effectively they became process workshops, and so it sort of makes it hard to sort of work out where does the process start and where does the journey end. And so I've come to my own kind of conclusion on it, which is by no means necessarily the right one, but the example I use is where we might have a customer going through a journey and step by step, but when we're actually talking about process, we might have, say, somebody batches together 8 different appointments that they do when they go out to do client visits, but that's not customer by customer. That's their workload for that day, and that's where the difference comes in for me. And also that customer journey mapping is often done for projects, and it's not something that lives on past it into BAU and gets updated. Well, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, but that's my experience of seen so far.
And journey mapping is going to be about personas, isn't it? I mean, we have 5 different personas for our customer base, and what are they experiencing? What we're trying to understand the customer. And we might know all about our process, but what's going on in that customer row of the swim lane? That's what we're trying to understand, I think.
Yeah, agree.
Great. No, fantastic. Thanks for that, Peter. Good to have you on again. Okay, now we've got Anne Lauray from the US. What would be a good way to organise a team to work on the master data management through a BPM, especially during an ERP migration project?
Yep. Pass. I have no idea. I'm not the tech guy. BPM, if we're talking process, then we've got to be in there. I mean, ERP project is about process and modifying someone else's process model to fit you. No, but that's a very specific thing. I don't think I should try and answer that. Maybe someone else has got a good answer.
Anything else you wanted to add, Anne-Laure?
No, thank you, Roger. I know it's a specific one, but we are struggling actually to organize that, and it's a massive project of ERP deployment for which definitely the BPM approach is the correct one. It's just that for the master data, I'm not sure the way we are tackling the topic is a good way. So I was just wondering.
No, that's good. I'll take note of that question, and I'll try and dig up some further information that we can send through to you afterwards.
If I wanted to answer that question, there are 2 people I'd go to. One's Carmen Jacobs. I don't know if Carmen's with us, and the other one's Alex Sharp. So you'll find them both on LinkedIn. Carmen is the ERP/BPM expert, and if it's about data, then Alex is, and process, then Alex is the man. So that's what I'd do.
Okay.
Fantastic. No, that's great. Thanks, Anne Lauray. Okay, so now we've got, and apologies if I don't get this name correct, Anwar Ul-Zahur Amjad. What proportion of Industry 3.0 business processes have to be modernised to stay relevant in the Industry 4.0 world? All 100%, 80%, or less? And he puts an example there. as an example, a manufacturing plant in Industry 3.0 world, when transformed to Industry 4.0 becomes a smart manufacturing plant, what happens to the business processes in that plant? And Anwar, I've allowed you to sort of add anything else in there if you wanted to say anything else.
Okay, let me have a go first, Anwar, and then you can ask me more or comment. So I think if we're what we're talking about here is the technology of production, isn't it? I mean, has the higher level process hasn't changed, has it? I mean, if the process is, I don't know, build car, then it's still process, and we need to build so many at such a rate with some quality and all that sort of thing. We have process KPIs. So at those higher levels, it doesn't change. If we're getting down to lower levels of process and we're getting closer and closer to actual technical construction options, and at some point, I guess it changes, but it might be quite low down. So the business process at the higher level, I think, hasn't changed. At lower levels, something's going to change ultimately if you're using different technology, but it might be quite a way down. What do you think, Anwar?
That's all right. It's just from what I was thinking is around if in Industry 4, most of the automation is towards automating those different steps in a process. So if a given process, Industry 3 have, say, 10 steps in it, in Industry 4 world, there might be around 70-80% of those 10 steps automated. Plants and different machinery doing those steps automatically, no human intervention there. So in that scenario, only maybe 10-20% of the steps in that business process, end-to-end business process, will remain. So that means the overall business process has shortened significantly from its Industry 3.0 version to only 20% of it in Industry 4.0. So I'm not sure. I was trying to look for some survey or some sort of benchmarking that I could find somewhere on internet to see if there is some sort of benchmark with some particular industry or some particular as an example plant here, manufacturing plant here has gone from Industry 3 to 4 and how it has impacted its processes. That's why I asked this question.
But I expect it's going to be difficult to get such precise data. But we go back to Toshi Ono, who said all he was ever trying to do at Toyota was reduce the time from the process from the start to the finish and just keep making it shorter and shorter. And as soon as you're doing that, then goodness follows. So I guess you're looking at a process, and for each sub-process, down however many levels you're working, you're saying, could we automate this usefully? And there'll be some process that takes 5 seconds, and you can now automate it, make it 3 seconds. But is that 4 seconds important? Is that on the kind of critical path, as it were? So I guess it's going to be kind of process dependent, and you're looking to test all of the time to say, is there a better way to achieve the target or better outcomes for this process, whether it's manufacturing or anything? I mean, that's the essential question of process management, I think.
I think especially over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of industries have been disrupted entirely by different startup companies entering into industries with a totally different perspective, a totally different way of doing things, delivering that same value, delivering a taxi service, delivering accommodation, but in a completely different way, with a new process that's different to how the industry has always been run. But I think it's not just been the last 10, 15 years. I think the way organisations operate have continuously evolved, and obviously that means that the workforce needs to continuously adapt and upskill and change where their skills lie and what they're qualified in, because a business today is going to is very different to what a business is going to look like in 5-10 years in that sort of lower level tasks getting stuff done. But yeah, as Rod just mentioned, at the high level, it's, we've still got the core objectives are still there. Okay, so we got Sanya. Sanya, thanks for joining us. Hi, Roger. You described how you start from strategy and define high level. What is your view on adoption of a common process classification and using it to define levels?
Yeah, good question, Sonia. So if it works, use it. I mean, we don't have to make life hard. We're trying to make life easier. So if the process of process architecture development can be improved, let's do that. So what I'm careful about, though, so I think of management, so shared management processes and shared support processes and core processes. So the core processes being the ones that are delivering on the strategy. And management is about kind of management decision makings, and support or enabling processes are, IT, finance, all important. We don't have unimportant processes. So I'm certain that management and support processes, we can go to reference models like the PCF or SCORE or lots of others. I have, when I start projects like that myself, I have a reference model of my own that I've built up over many projects and many years. So for management and support, I think it's okay. You still need to be careful that the point about a reference model, of course, is that this is everybody else's processes. So you've got to make sure that they are yours and not just someone else's. In the core, I always like to start with a blank sheet of paper and the strategy. And I think it's really important to use terms in there that have meaning in the organisation. Now, if you've got a detailed process model for, say, a hospital, and the terminology is the same or it can be modified easily and it resonates with everyone, then use it. That's fine. But often when you're doing this, there is no, you just have the kind of, processes that are called things like order to cash or, acquire customer or whatever. And, that may not be the terminology you use. So I like to think that the set of high-level core processes and perhaps their sub-processes, so those couple of levels, explain the strategy to people. And then when you get to support process, everyone's got IT and HR and finance, and very few organisations, no organisation is going to differentiate itself by having the world's best, accounts payable process. You could differentiate yourself by having the worst, I suppose, but people just expect that you do finance and you have IT. So all of those are important, but picking up, ITIL or COBIT or something straight off well-developed process models for a process you might call provide IT services, that would be fine. I mean, just plug it in. The thinking's been done, plug it in, tailor it if you need to. Project management is a classic. All of the project management models, whether it's Prince or PMBOK, whatever you're using is a process model. So why would you want to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? So use it if it works and if it resonates, but I always like, particularly the core, to sound like it's your organisation and not some other generic organisation.
Anything? Yeah, Sanya?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think that, yes, you've answered my question, and there is a fine balance, as you said, between using what is available and making it, and I think within a reason, probably we could always rename still use the classification, but perhaps rename to match, and then use the level 4s to decompose level 4 to actually represent the specific organization processes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sanya. Okay, so Marcus Udikang has another question here. Processes exist in all organizations, whether documented informally or not. Where is a good starting point to start to formally document a less than mature process? And Anthony Eldridge jumps in as well with a similar question that relates to this. How does process management mix with a company's vision and values? What recommendations do you have to ensure the human factor is included in a process?
Okay, thank you. Hi, Anthony. So I think for both of you, if we said what's the best place to start. I would want to start, again, I'd be back at strategy, and I'd want to start at the high level of the process architecture. This doesn't take a long time, and you don't have to get it perfect. It's going to change all the time. But if we were talking about a particular process somewhere, I would want to understand where that fits in a kind of top-down architectural sense. And if you're struggling to get from your vision, your strategy to the first level of process, then it's because you don't understand the strategy. Or if you're having arguments about what the highest level processes are, it means you've got to, have a lot more conversation about the strategy and what does it really mean? What are we actually trying to achieve? So I think that's where I'd want to start. But I'm not saying you've got to model the entire organization just to model one process. But when I'm talking about building the architecture, we're just naming the process. We're not doing lots of modeling. We're saying care for patients is a high level process, and then what is the life cycle? Everything from admissions and initial evaluations through to exit and aftercare, etc. So we're just naming the processes, and then once you get to the process that's important, then if you want to get people interested in doing anything about that process, you need a very good definition of what's the problem and why would we care. The problem is not we don't have a process model. Nobody has that as a business problem. Now, maybe it takes too long. Maybe we're killing too many people. Maybe it costs too much. Maybe it's just variable. It's not stable. One time it takes an hour and another time it'll take 10 hours and the variation is just too much to deal with. Maybe our customers hate it. There's a reason. And then we've got to be very clear about that. Okay, so here's the problem. Now, what would good look like? What is it now? It takes 5 hours and we want it to take 1 hour. Okay, now we're talking. And what's the business case? What is the cost of fixing it now? But what's the cost of not fixing it? Some customers are upset. Okay, do we care? I mean, how many? Who? If it's, a handful of people who use our service occasionally, do we really want to invest in that? Or if it's our top 3 customers, then okay, well, that's a big deal. Let's get going. So I think, locate the process in the architecture, then understand why we even want to look at it, and make sure your decision makers, who are the people at the end of an improvement project that are going to approve this and make it happen. Start talking to them now, not at the end of the project.
Yeah.
Make sure they agree it's a problem, because if it's not, don't waste time.
That's good. Marcus, Anthony,
both of you?
Yeah. Anything else to add there?
No, I think that's quite good. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Marcus. You got it?
Really, yeah, you answered it. Thank you very much.
Good.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, so moving on, Sandeep Johal says, what are your thoughts on having an in-house process management capability? Is it better outsourced?
Sandeep. I mean, whatever you're going to, firstly, general comment about outsourcing. Outsourcing something because you don't understand it has proven many, many times to be a bad idea, right? Because once you've outsourced it, you understand it even less, you've got less control, and it usually turns out to cost more than you think. Now, but generally, if you understand a process well enough that you can make good decisions about outsourcing, then that might be a good thing to do. Now, you might outsource the execution of a process, and maybe there's some bits of managing the process you might also outsource, but management of processes is the job of an organization. So who does which bits of that? If you know enough about the process, if your knowledge is so profound that you can manage it at a distance, then that's a good thing, perhaps. But I don't think you'd ever not have some capability, some office of BPM or some centre of excellence internally. And you certainly wouldn't start by outsourcing everything, because you'll never know what's working and what's not. Doesn't matter what your outsourcer promises. Once it's outsourced, it's at arm's length from you. That's the point. So, and so is the knowledge of performance and how to improve it, and
Yeah, I think that's one big challenge when organisations do get that external support. If that knowledge isn't transferred across to the organisation, as soon as that support leaves, there's nothing that's retained. But Sandeep, is there anything else you wanted to throw in there?
Well, I just wanted to get a feel of the investment, I suppose, into having an internal capability, because we've met many people who are interested in having that, but they have a tough time getting that off the ground, getting an internal process capability off the ground. And it's usually the buy-in that's a bit of an issue. So what we see normally happen is, let's just get external people to come solve this problem. But if you've done a massive implementation like an ERP, for instance, sorry, Roger, to bring up ERP again, you need some continuous improvement, continuous support for process improvement. So I was just trying to get a gauge on where things are at with that sort of thinking.
So, I mean, if we're talking about the kind of outsourcing model where you brought in a bunch of people, perhaps a team of people who are going to work on your premises, and they're going to be effectively the in-house BPM team, and the difference really is the kind of nature of the employment contract, then perhaps that's no different. That's a thing for the finance department and the lawyers to work out, because we've still got a identifiable group in our company that does this stuff, and all intents and purposes, they're part of us. But if we're talking about something that's done, kind of remotely from us, physically remotely, and conceptually remotely, then that can be more difficult. But I think if you can get, would it be is it any easier to get buy-in, executive buy-in and funding for some outsourced view of that than to actually have it yourself? Maybe if there's a headcount constraint, I guess that's going to be a problem.
And I think, and sorry to interrupt, but I think that's the big question, right? So are we expanding the process management team, and is that actually seen as a return on investment? Because if there are a lot of problems to solve, then why isn't this team solving those problems? Why is it that we need more and more people in process improvement? So it's a bit of a difficult one, but I guess the balance is what we need.
Yeah, absolutely, as always. And I think also we need to be thinking about the executive reaction to saying we're going to set up a new team, because, we're talking about 5 people now, and they just know next year you're going to want 50. And I think, growing the central team is a mistake, because as soon as you start thinking they're going to do all of the work, then I think it has to be a bottleneck, doesn't it? So we need to build capability out through the organisation. So I would be perfectly happy putting some limits on the size of the central group, and it could be a handful of people, literally, for quite a complex organisation, as long as we're building capability out in the rest of the organisation, and we can draw on some external capability from time to time as we want. And we can say, okay, at the end of over this last 12 months, what have we achieved? The answer is not, we've modelled 500 processes and we've got some nice diagrams. That's not going to cut it. We're going to say, here's 5 managers from the business who'll tell you how we help them, reduce backlogs, increase profits, better customer satisfaction, and tie the process work into those classic business measures. If we're seen to be a solution and not a new problem, then buy-in comes reasonably easily. But when people think, what you want to do is have a whole group of people who are going to run those annoying workshops and produce lots of process models. Really? I'd like to stop all that nonsense, not do more of it. Get out of my office, that's the risk.
That's great.
Always good to get your point of view, Roger. Thanks.
Thanks, Sandeep. So next question we've got is from Michael, who says, "Hi, Roger. Michael from DOT in Melbourne, Department of Transport, I'm assuming. We do not have a mandated BPM approach across the department. That is okay, our current level of BPM maturity. We typically get functions into process management through an improvement project we do for the business. Some functions adopt and we will continue to manage their processes, others don't. Any tips on how we can make this more sustainable?"
Yep, the thing that gives you success is success. Huh? I think you can. You don't need anyone's permission, by the way, to build a process architecture. I'm not sure if you've got one or not, Michael, but you could get just your immediate team together and say, okay, how would we translate strategy into processes? And you don't have to get executive approval to do it, and you don't have to even publish it. It could be just an internal reference, or you might, stick it up on a wall sometime and see what people say. They might think, "Oh, gee, that's an interesting view." So you can start that kind of thing, and then I think we can be very targeted, and we can say, we've got to build up a case for doing more and more, and it's going to be based on being, as I say, a solution, not a problem. So we find a process that's got some pain and some people who are kind of interested in the process view, even if they haven't quite worked out what it means in detail, but it resonates with them. And we get in and we work with them and we help it, and then we've got an internal case study. And, even if you've got one, that's enough. And you can publish it internally. You can do the videos. You can make the movie. We can do all of the stuff to sell that. You get that manager on camera saying, well, yeah, I wasn't sure about this when we started, but, we've solved this serious problem and these guys were a big help. We had to be there as well, but the whole process view and the tools and stuff, it's fantastic, and we're going to do more. So then you just circulate that video around, and then your big challenge is to survive that success, because you've got 100 phone calls saying, come and help, which is a serious problem, by the way, but it's a nice one to have. So I think you have to be successful, and you don't need lots. One will do, and then 2 and 3, and you build the library. You think of the internal group as an internal consulting company. You go to any consulting company or vendor for that matter, and you'll find case studies, and you'll find, lots of marketing messages nicely honed, and you can do that even more easily internally because you know exactly what problems people have.
Michael, any other thoughts to that?
That's exactly what we are doing. We are positioned as an internal process improvement consultancy. And for improvement project, it works beautifully, and word of mouth is spreading, and we have a bit of the problem that too many people are wanting our services. Where we are still struggling a little bit is that we're going in, we do an improvement project, we document processes, we introduce ProMap, people get excited, then we finish the project, we leave. Some business then will continue to manage their process and take business ownership, what we want. Some business then tend to forget that we did that, and the process is there, it's documented, it's there, but it's not maintained, and over time it's getting out of date. Right? So we're struggling a little bit to keep the business accountable to, after the improvement project was done, to look after their processes, because it has to be the business. It can't be us on a central function. The business has to take accountability, and some businesses do, some businesses not. So we are struggling. It could be a bit better. We're looking for ways for the business to take a bit more accountability after the project is completed.
Well, yeah, thanks, Michael. So I think it's the same, though, isn't it? You've got to demonstrate the value. You've got to be able to say to these busy managers and decision makers, they've got to be able to see why they'd want to do that. Why are they better off doing that? Or are they just producing stuff to send off to those annoying process people? And again, I don't think you need lots of examples to start with. You have a case or 2 or 3, and I'm sure you get close to that, and then you can start to promote that. That's a powerful message. And by the way, just for everyone's benefit, Michael runs a community of practice built around DOT, and it's got, isn't it, 700 regular members, Michael? I mean, you're doing something right.
That's working well, and that's another platform for us to show how this is working, how does this provide value to the organization, and a lot of people say, oh yes, we missed that, we just didn't know that we are missing that. and they're jumping on. So some businesses are open doors and we just need to walk through or guide the business through. Other businesses are a little bit more hesitant.
And what you don't want, of course, is every manager coming to you this afternoon to say, come and help me. I mean,
yeah.
that might be hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that, Michael. So we've got a couple of minutes left. So we'll get maybe at least one other question for now, and we'll respond to everything, all the missed questions afterwards. But Manish says, for organizations that are big on digital, at least mention that on strategy, but have lower process maturity, how should we bring in the understanding of better process management and maturity before going digital? Also, any frameworks available to understand digital maturity and linkage to process maturity?
Yeah, so big on digital, at least mentioned in the strategy. That's an interesting concept. So I think it's always about the process, though, isn't it? I mean, automation, IT solutions are one way of improving a process. Obviously, an important way, and our complex organisations can't survive without all kinds of digital tools and digitisation. But I would always think, if we don't understand the process in its current form, whatever that is, and what's right and wrong with it, and what good would look like, and what exceptional would look like, if we don't have that kind of perspective in some detail, then what do we think we're doing? I mean, digitising a process, because some magic is going to happen and now it'll perform well, is a pretty risky strategy. So, what is the business case for digitisation has to be based on the fact that it's going to improve performance. And in my view of life, that means we're going to improve the performance of a bunch of processes. And we want to do that in a mindful, meaningful way.
That's great. Manish, anything else you wanted to add there?
No, that's right. And I think that's the gap that kind of we see. Unfortunately, we work in a very, I would say, siloed manner, work for a function as a part of their process team. But when there are big initiatives like digitization or a program called a DSR run on the side, mostly managed by technology, they don't have a clear about, okay, what are the things and how the process really works. And what, again, Roger, you're right that even before getting into automation, we should look at the process simplified before taking. People understand that, but they don't really engage any of the right process teams. And unfortunately, because of the structure, things kind of just go away. And then once we realize that the process is digitized, then nothing has changed. So I was just thinking, is there a model or something, or I don't know, a framework that people can bring in? At least I can get the business architecture team to look into it.
Well, yeah, I think it's pretty basic. If you've got a process architecture and you say, what are our high impact processes and how are they performing? So what's the KPIs and what's the current performance and what's the gap? What's the problem we're trying to fix? That's where I'd want to start. And if digitization is the fix, well, great. But it's not magic. That's
great. Thanks for that, Manish. Now, obviously, we were only able to, I think we smashed through 15 questions in that session, but I know that there are many outstanding questions that we weren't able to get around to. But Roger, in wrapping up, you've obviously seen, a number of the questions that were thrown your way. Is there anything that, with all of those questions in mind, that any sort of last thoughts or comments that you wanted to leave with the audience, maybe a question that wasn't asked, or maybe a topic or thought that we didn't get around to? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, there's lots we didn't get around to, and I'm happy to do this again if you like sometime. But I think just from the questions we are able to deal with and the glimpses I've seen of the others passing through the screen, I feel your pain, firstly. And I think it comes back to organisations having a compelling reason or reasons for even starting the process journey. What is the touchstone we're going to come back to? Because it'll get harder before it gets easier. Always does. So what are the compelling reasons? And, why would we do this? So when it comes and you say, oh, no, not another set of workshops. Why are we doing this? Well, we've got a good answer. And The people we're dealing with don't have whole days spare in their week wondering what to do. So they're not going to say, "Oh, goody, here's another workshop I can go to." That will fill up a boring day. I mean, we don't have people like that. So I think it's, what's the compelling reason? What's the strategic reason? What's the reason that resonates? Perhaps different reasons at different levels of the organization. So I think we've got to have a good reason for doing it. And using the world's best process modeling tool is not a good enough reason.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been many initiatives where, technology has been adopted and it kind of ends up not getting used or not delivering the value. Many organizations out there wouldn't have a clue of all of the systems and applications they've adopted, maybe a small percentage of them. But yeah, a lot of purchases being made without actually any value being delivered. But Roger, I just wanted to thank you for sitting down with me today for this very special episode of Process Pioneers. I hope it was of value, and it's something that I wanted to trial out and see if it's something that we can do in the future for other episodes. I really enjoyed the lively sort of interaction. I can see the chat sections just going off with all interactions in there, and we've got a whole bunch of questions we didn't even get around to. So I think I hope it's delivered value, and we'll certainly be uploading this episode on all of the different podcast platforms, YouTube, all of the audio platforms. We'll be posting it on LinkedIn as well, so you'll be able to watch the recording afterwards. But Roger, it's been an absolute pleasure again, and looking forward to a follow-up event sometime in the future.
Yep, anytime. I love it. Thank you all. Thanks for your questions, and all the best.